Welcome to the Winter Get Better Guide, Understanding Backswings. How do we need to swing a club in order to be the most efficient? So we've gone through a series of just some pros, cons, just like how to practice. Now let's kind of get a little bit more defined. There's a lot of backswings out there, and it's not really the swing your swing idea. It's more of let's go through cause and effect. Okay, so when we're looking at cause and effect, there's a lot of things that end up happening. So the first example of these things is kind of an inside takeaway on our backswing. So inside takeaway, a lot of people will think, oh, I can't take it inside. I got to be down a swing path. I got to have this perfect arc. You don't really have to, but there are things that you have to understand. So if I'm taking it inside here, I can be okay as long as I allow my hands to travel out a little bit to help me hit the ball a little bit. So then we would get into shallowing. Now, before we get into that, understanding inside takeaway with an open club face like this, lots of forearm roll, is one of those things that is very detrimental, okay? If I do something like that, as I'm coming down, I'm gonna start to come over the top. That's more of a big time slicers pattern. So one of the things that I would say is if we're seeing, so if we're in this winter environment, we're filming ourselves, we're indoors, and we start taking back, and we're seeing that face wide open. So what do I mean by face wide open? If I turn and face my club, that thing is open. That is not the same as my setup, okay? So setting up, even taking some practice swings like, oh, do I have an inside takeaway? And I take it back and I'm like this, turn and face it. That is different than my start, okay? Now, let's say I take it back kind of more in that okay form. So I'm right here. I turn and face it. My club is still square. So now I have a chance to stay inside, maybe let the hands travel, hit maybe a small fade. That's okay, we can play that shot. If we do open it up, what that is that's setting up here, taking kind of our steering wheel idea, and you're basically turning that steering wheel to the right. So you're making a right turn. So in order to correct that, we might just take a book or a circular object, feeling a steering wheel, and almost feeling as if we're turning to the left as we're taking it back. Okay, now that would help us keep that club face square, but I want to show you just this idea of inside takeaway is not always terrible and not something that has to be corrected right away. Maybe throughout time we can kind of get it more down that plane line. But if I get this inside takeaway, I just have to stay inside just a little bit. So what we can see there is that's going to be a pretty big draw, but that would be an inside takeaway with a square club face. So as I took it to the top, I was keeping this thing square up, and my hands travel a little bit more towards the ball. Club kind of stays behind me. Okay, that would be one example of understanding our takeaway and what kind of shot we can hit with it. Now let's get into more of a across the line. So let's define across the line. At the top of my backswing, instead of pointing parallel left to the target, I'm pointing more at the target. That would be considered across the line. Versus taking it up, pointing it away from the target line, that would be what's considered laid off. Okay, now what are the pros, cons of that? So typically when I'm looking at golfers, across the line is more of a draw pattern. So typically when we see people across the line, they get up here, and what ends up happening is the butt of the club kind of travels a little bit towards the ball, and then that helps that club shallow out, basically taking this club and moving it more horizontal to the ground. That's what we consider shallow. Steeper paths are taking this club and moving it the opposite way, so kind of more down, perpendicular to the ground. So if we understand that, how do we play from our across the line position? Well, what I often recommend is a good drill that I often give out is this right index finger down the side of a grip here. Taking it up, feeling that across the line motion, and then letting the club relax, almost pulling it back into my right finger. So if I'm set up and I'm hitting a couple, I'd take a pause at the top. So I'm up across the line and letting it relax. We're going to see a lot of shallowing from there, and then we'd have to correct the face. So as I'm taking it up, as I'm relaxing, I'm letting that club face almost open up a little bit and fall behind me. So one more time. Now I have a big push draw. That is one way to play from an across the line position. Typically speaking, we would want to have players with that kind of across the line and shallowing motion rotate a little bit more through impact. So let's try one of those. I'm going to feel my chest and hips turn a little bit more through impacts and see what I can get out of it. So again, push draw, letting that club kind of shallow out, but I've kind of managed my club path in a little bit of an easier way. Now let's go over that laid off position. Typically speaking, I don't like to see any of my players laid off. That's when the club moves a little bit steeper in transition, but there are ways around it. So taking it up, laying off. So here, laying this thing off. As I'm coming down, as I'm kind of steepening the club, I want to make sure that I'm not moving too far forward. So typically speaking, when I see this up, kind of laid off, I see a big lateral motion getting kind of in front of the ball, and that's going to create this big push fade. So a lot of times when I see somebody in this laid off here, I have them feel like they're staying behind the ball, keeping their head behind the ball a little bit more. Nothing wrong with hitting the fade. Okay, I was actually able to draw it from that laid off position because I kept my head behind the ball just a little bit more. And that would just be a couple ways that we could develop a swing without necessarily changing the backswing a ton. And understanding your swing pattern and how you take the club back will oftentimes help you hit better shots. So take a couple of those drills, check it out, let me know how it goes.